So welcome to week 4 of Uncommon Sense Teaching Cohort. This is our last session, unfortunately, sadly. And this course is brought to you and taught by Barbara Oakley, Terry Sinowski, and Beth Rogowski. And it's provided by Coursera. Barb is professor of engineering at Auckland University in Michigan, author of Learning How to Learn, A Mind for Numbers, Learn Like a Pro, and Mindshift. And today, without further ado, let's talk about Uncommon Sense teaching, the first one, and we are anxiously waiting for the next two, apparently. So welcome, everybody, and welcome, Barb.
Oh, well, thank you so much. You know, I should say that, so the second MOOC is coming together really well. I have the framework all up, and we're just loading videos on now as they're completed by the video editing team. And I think you're going to really like them. But if you would like to be a beta learner, you know, and just like check things out and see if there's anything I screwed up, which I can really do. I'm a champion at that. I would love to add you in, and then you can, you know, we only have about 7 videos loaded on so far. So there's more to come, but let me put my email in the chat box here. And, you know, if you'd like to go on as a staff behind the scenes and, you know, leave pointed criticism, that would actually be quite nice. That's my email right there. And let's see. So, well, I'd like to just begin by just hearing you and having a nice conversation. Oh, there's Connie. Connie, send me an email, and then that will get on my to-do list. Okay. Oh, we've got it. Okay, great. So just pop me emails, and I will take care of you. Let's see. Like Heather, you just have this friendly face this morning? May I just sort of out of the blue say, do you have any questions at all?
I always have a lot of questions, but I don't have any right this second because my coffee hasn't kicked in yet. So.
This is my coffee, so I don't know why. I like using a glass. Oh, look, you got clear glass or something resembling that. So
now has a question here on the chat.
Okay.
She says, I was wondering, when we are learning on Duolingo, are we really using procedural or declarative learning, or both? And I think this is a really nice question.
It's a wonderful question, because I've thought a lot about this. I am about 2.5 years into Duolingo. I do Spanish and Russian, and it's mostly just to at least have a little bit, you know, at hand. I want to kind of brush up on the Russian, but I don't have enough time to really like start doing italki. Hopefully you all know, those of you who are interested in language probably know about this, but it's a Skype platform that you can hire a tutor or just for free converse with someone from another country in another language. And so, I mean, to my mind, one of the best ways to learn another language, of course, if you can't actually be in the country, is to use italki to help spur your, you know, desire to talk and to get those little neural networks going, because you're actually trying to bring forth ideas as you converse. But the bottom line is, when I use italki, let's say I had a half an hour or a 1 hour conversation with somebody once a week. Well, the compulsive part of me, when they say, oh, well, now you should be practicing and like learning all these additional vocabulary words on the side. You know, what that really means is it's like, it's not 1 hour of talking with that person on italki. It is It's actually their expectation is that I will do many hours of work outside of Italki. And the challenge for me is I don't have time to do that. So rather than be guilted into something that I really am unable to accomplish, you know, if I had stronger will, I could, you know, just say thanks, but all I have time for is our conversation today. But so I use Duolingo because Duolingo allows me to have little bits of practice, like 5 or 10 minutes with each language each day. And that's the magic for me, is even when I just don't feel like it and I'm really sick or I'm traveling or I'm blah, 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 whatever my excuse is, I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to lose that consecutive streak. So, it's funny, my daughter, who is married to a Chilean, and so they speak Spanish at home all the time. And, you know, I can't say my Spanish is any good at all, but I do notice, like, when their relatives all come up and they don't speak English at all. So it's like you're just thrown in with this big group of Chileans who speak Chilean Spanish, which is kind of a different kettle of fish. And it's sink or swim. I mean, you either got to speak some Spanish or you just can't communicate. So, and she's noticed that when I'm amongst the Chilean contingent, as she calls them, I'm able to really communicate better just from these little snippets I've been doing over a couple of years. And I do find it's like a daily reminder of the basic structures of, it's a daily reminder of some of the main points of the language. My sense is there is some declarative learning. I'm trying to pay attention to a new word that they might give, but it's really, I think it's more working on procedural, or at least as much working on procedural. I find that I will, not always, but I'll just kind of intuitively come up with the right conjugation on a verb, or even with a different tense. Wow. And I wouldn't have had this intuition at all like 2 years ago. It would have just been, so I think it's a bit of both. And for me, Duolingo is, the only thing I don't like about Duolingo is, like, I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago, they moved into having a variety of language speakers. And that includes people who talk like this, like you are really dumb and they are a snob looking down. And I'm just like, whose idea was this? You know, you go to the Russian and they have friendly, happy people. And, you know, and then when, you know, I go to the Spanish, I'm just like, why did they do this? Whose idea was this? And, you know, I think people take it just because they get into the flow and they do it. But I mean, people can tell whether you're a good teacher within the first 30 seconds. And part of that is just, you know, the tone of your voice, the inflection you use. And if it's like, I'm super bored with you and with life in general, you know, I think it kind of turns people off of learning, but that's just me. It's my long prattle there.
I have a related question.
Okay.
This is Hiroyo. So after learning a lot about how the brain learns and everything, and I realized, so I grew up in Japan and I live in the United States, and I learned that like the synapses that I will never be able to distinguish like a L and R because those are pruned. And so like, is it still like good idea to try to improve pronunciation even though you move to a new country so that people understand? But I have to, I guess, realize the fact that I will never be able to like sound like people who are born here. I don't know, like I get discouraged all the time when my husband, who is a native speaker of English, like correct me, which is really good. But sometimes as like, I just feel so discouraged. I don't know.
Well, it was so interesting because when you said, the difference between L and R, you pronounced them very clearly. I mean, it was like really virtually a perfect accent. There is evidence that, and this is why there are accent improvement tutors, that you can, even if those neurons are pruned away, so you wouldn't really know the L and the R and the difference between them, that you can gain some of these kinds of abilities because of neuroplasticity. Mm. And it was very interesting. I was speaking with a woman, and she runs the Helen Doran learning centers around the world, and they're language learning centers. And I asked her because I had talked with this one fellow, and he was an American who had lived in Japan for a really long time. And he had tutored these two young boys, virtually, from toddlerhood up. And he said when they were toddlers and, youngsters, they could say L and R, those kinds of words perfectly. They sounded like native speakers. And then when they got into adolescence, they started not being able to say L and R. And I asked her, I said, why do you think that is the case? And she said, and neuroscience bears this out. There's like a fundamental feeling of who you are that provides your motivation for doing things, for framing things, for seeing things. And she said, I have two sons. One speaks English with a perfect American accent, and the other speaks English with an Israeli accent. And she said, and she thought it had to do with their fundamental sort of characterization of themselves and their internal motivations as being, characterized as like going back and forth between the two worlds, or leaning more towards one world or leaning more towards another world. So I try, even when I'm studying Spanish or, trying to study a language, I do notice that sometimes I will say words and there's like this subliminal sense within me that I'm mimicking an American saying the words rather than really being a Spanish speaker, like wanting to have that mindset of, being a Spanish speaker. And then I try deliberately to kind of change my mindset. And I think that helps some. It would be a lot better if I had more time. But I remember when I learned Russian, people thought I was just kind of a nut because I was a little bit like a parrot. I mean, I would spend hours and somehow this is kind of fun for me, which tells you, that I'm kind of a boring person. But I would just spend so many hours really trying to understand or to say the words with a really good accent. And because I do think that it's really, it just makes an enormous difference if you're able to kind of get the right accent as you're speaking, because the worse your accent, the more you seem like an alien to that culture. Mm-hmm. There's, the wonderful book, what is it? Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. And he talks about how he would, he can speak a number of different African languages. And people would look at him sometimes and they'd say, oh, he's light colored because his father was from Switzerland and his mother was African. And so they would come up and they'd start speaking in their, seemingly unknown language, which he would know. And they would like come up to him like they were going to attack him. And then he would say in the perfect, whatever that language was. And he'd say, what are you guys doing? How do you? And they'd immediately back off because he could, he was suddenly one of them, clearly, not because of how he looked, but because he spoke the language so well. I really, one thing that I'm kind of a little sad about is when I switched to engineering, I spent, I was really devoting my full attention to that. And so I let the Russian go. And now I'm trying to bring it back. And my accent is, is not bad, but it used to be like perfect. And I can still, or, really, really very good. And, still when I speak it, like if I speak it in short bursts, I can usually like say the words that I know I can say without too much accent at all. And then they're like, oh, you speak Russian perfectly. And of course I don't. It's all rusty and so forth. It makes people laugh so much though. Like they'll introduce me at conferences and they'll say, oh, and she speaks perfect Russian. And of course I don't, it's so rusty, but I'll understand that. And I'll say, no, I don't speak perfect Russian. And everybody will start laughing because I speak it, I can say that with a perfect Russian accent. And, so I don't know, it's all confusing, but lots of fun. And I think, Hiroyo, it's well worth continuing to try, no matter what your age, because it will get better. And in any case, it at least won't get worse.
Thank you.
I have an anecdote that maybe should shed some light. I was in a village many years ago in Japan, and I was asked to speak for an English class. And I said, I picked up an apple and I said, this is an apple, say after me. And some of the children said, Apuru. My name was Bell, so I was Beru-san. So the kids said the L, so I didn't say Bell, so Beru. So some of the children said apple, and the teacher jumped in and said, no, Apuru.
That's great.
We put vowel to everything. So Apuru and the Makudo and things like that. So
it's just a native speaker, I guess that's just the pedagogic lesson that you have to, they translate things in their own way of own context. So
yeah,
I just wanted to ask, like, is it, do you think it has an impact on your language learning what your native language is? Because, for example, my husband and I both kind of learned German, and I found it a lot easier to get the pronunciations and things correct because my mother tongue is Hindi, which is phonetic, and my husband's is English, which is all over the place. So I'm just wondering if the way your native tongue is structured has an impact on your learning new languages.
Well, for one thing, I mean, India is a really special case because a lot of people from India do speak not only, Hindi, for example, but they're also very familiar with lots of other languages and sometimes kind of different ones. So, it's almost like your background may have prepared you not just because of, if you learn one language, then the second language will, or, it's actually your third language is going to come easier. But if you're coming from someplace like India, where there's just such a, it's kind of taken for granted that people will speak multiple languages, and you kind of have bits and pieces at least of other languages besides, the one that is your native, that might have helped you as well. Do you speak bits and pieces of anything besides Hindi?
My Hindi is actually not very good. My English is my first language, but I can speak and write and read Hindi, but I can understand Punjabi and Urdu, and I can understand little bits of Gujarati because the roots are very similar. And funnily enough, that's what helped me learn German as well, because some of the roots were from Sanskrit words.
Ah,
And at the moment I'm learning the native language of where I am, which is Malaysia. So I'm learning Bahasa Malaysia, which again is phonetic.
uh-huh.
And some of the rules are slightly different, but I'm finding it fairly easy because whenever I can't think of how to correctly pronounce something, I can always write it in Hindi, and then I know exactly how to say it.
Ah, so just out of curiosity, do you have a good memory for words in new languages, or do you struggle to retain them?
I don't know. It's like my brain will switch into foreign language mode. So sometimes when I'm trying to think of the word I'm supposed to say in Bahasa Malaysia, like German will pop out, or a random word from Italian, which I learned years ago and never used. So I've forgotten most of it, but random words like hunger will pop out instead of, the Bahasa word for it. So it's weird. Like I won't ever replace it with the English word. It'll be some other foreign language that I've learned. So it's just like my brain switches into that mode.
That's so interesting, because I know for me, I studied a little French in high school, and here it is, like we're talking 55 years later or something, and I'll be trying to say something in Spanish and this French will pop out, and I'm like, what the heck, where'd that come from? So it is funny how we can really retain things. So I have to go on an aside here. It's like, how are long-term memories formed? So I'm really lucky. I'm sitting in on a class that Terry Sanowski is teaching along with other people. And the great thing about Terry is when he teaches neuroscience, like other people will like get up and they talk, and I find that my eyes are glazing over and I just kind of really don't get the main gist of what he's saying or what the person is saying. And if Terry interrupts and says, oh, well, what you mean, what the key idea going on here is, and then all of a sudden you can understand everything. And he's really good at catching key points and, communicating them in a really good way. But there's a brilliant neuroscientist named Roger Chen, who won the Nobel Prize and unfortunately passed away a few years ago, and as the result of a stroke. But the ultimate idea that they're kind of trying to approach is the idea that memories form not so much due to the neurons growing up or the dendritic spines attaching to a bouton, or and they're coming up close to one another and connecting with neurotransmitters. That is part of memory, of course. But how do we retain a long-term memory for like 50, 60, 70 years? And the main idea is, it's not necessarily so much that the neuron is coming up and the two neurons and connecting and forming that connection. It's the shell around the neuron that's held in place by all these fibers, with both within the neuron and outside, actin fibers and so forth. And that this forms a kind of a matrix that may help hold memories in place because of the structure, that fixes holes in place, almost like a physical hole in the wall of a fortress that all the neurotransmitters or people go in and out of, but it's fixed, just like the wall of a fortress is fixed. And that may be, it's almost like scar tissue is what forms memory. So that's Roger Chen's hypothesis, which actually kind of grew out of something that Terry had said. So it's fascinating. How do we form long-term memories, and how these kinds of things grow? So I think that Karashmi, it's some people have a better sense for how to remember words. I wish I did. I'm a slower learner, but there are advantages to that as well. Let's see. Tagalog is next on my list. I was so wish I was there with you studying it. That would be so fun.
Barbara, this structure you mentioned, is it the myelin sheath? I think that's the pronunciation, I'm not sure. The structure said on the neurons.
Myelin
Yeah,
sheath.
sheath, yes, myelin sheath.
No, it's not the myelin sheath, which does indeed surround. So you've got your neuron, and it has like this arm that reaches out, and that arm has like fingers at the end of it. You can see there's the fingers, but the myelin sheath covers, it's like this fatty tissue that covers the arm so that it keeps the signal inside the arm. It keeps it mostly inside, and it can propagate faster, just like if you have an electrical wire, if you put insulation on it, it sort of prevents that signal from dribbling off other places accidentally, and it actually can help with propagation. But that is quite different. So here we go. We've got our hand here. Here's the axon covered with myelin. And when myelin goes away, it's not a good thing. Let's see, I'm trying to think which disease. I think it's
Alzheimer?
No, it's not Alzheimer's. There's a common disease.
Sclerosis.
No, that causes the myelin sheath to sort of gradually, disintegrate, and that is, it's not a good thing in the long term. But what happens is, so you've got these fingers that reach up. The end of them it's got this little flat surface on it, kind of like the end of my finger, but as if I was like a lemur or something. You know how they have like suckers on the end of their fingers, and that comes up to a dendritic spine that is dangling off of some other neuron. So it comes up there, and that little gap in between is called a synapse. And this synapse, making connections between neurons through these synapses is how we learn. It's that connection place. It's like the little membrane capsule around it, and the membrane capsule around this dendritic spine, those may, they've got little holes in them, and they send signals back and forth through those holes, the chemicals that go through those holes. That's a way of thinking of it. And it's like there's a casing around this part of the neuron and a casing around this part of the neuron, just as like a skin, just like the skin here. And it may be the skin that is helping to hold the memory, because the skin, it remains when, it's kind of there. So even when chemicals are changing inside the cells, that skin or the casing remains, and it may be the casing that helps hold the information, which I think is just like. But here's the really weird thing, though, is that is a fascinating hypothesis, and it explains a lot. But what it doesn't explain is latest neuroscientific findings that show that memories seem to migrate from neuron to neuron, at least in the hippocampus and parts of the basal ganglia. So, how does that happen? How does that accord with Roger Chen's? Maybe hippocampal learning is different than, we already know it's different than, the long-term memories that are deposited in the neocortex. So maybe neocortex neurons, hold long-term memories that way. Whatever it is, I can definitely tell you that at least some aspects of French are like scar tissue. They just remain there, and they pop up at the most inopportune moments.
Thank you so much.
Okay, let's see. More comments or questions?
There is a good question from Nina. Would you like to speak, or do you want me to read it?
Okay, I can speak. First of all, thank you so much for this wonderful course. I have sent it to many of my friends. And so I'm in online teaching and since many years. And one of the questions that I have is that in online teaching we face a challenge of self study, and so if even if we implement all these things like active learning and active and teaching and all the things that have been mentioned here, retrieval practice and everything, but uh, what kind of expectations should a teacher have from the course, that because of the element of self study, right? The student might get distracted, especially because it's online, and we might still see a very high, a very low completion rate, very high, like dropout rate. So,
Mhm.
how to define the matrices to see that what you have done has got you the results
That you
that you.
want to get? Oh, okay. That's a complicated question. And it touches on many important facets. Um, the bottom line, so, I always refer back to my favorite athlete of all time, Julius Yego, who wanted to become, an expert at throwing the javelin. And so he watched YouTube videos and then, went out and practiced on his own because that was the only way he could do it. And, like 98% of the time, just by doing that, he was able to become the world champion at throwing the javelin. So what was the key there? It was his own internal motivation. So motivation is really a fascinating topic. And we actually are just, we know very little about how do you get people motivated from a neuroscientific perspective. And it turns out that the past theories of motivation, which were like you have intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic comes from inside you. Extrinsic is like people pay money for you to do something or something like that, and that motivates you. So, and it was felt that intrinsic motivation was the best and extrinsic motivation was a really bad thing, and you should avoid it at all costs. But actually, neuroscience is revealing that that's not really the case. In fact, the brain doesn't recognize a difference between intrinsic, internally motivated, and externally motivated motivation. And in fact, more what it is motivated by, it's either motivated by, desire for something or aversion to something. That's what's really going on in our brains when we, are wanting or wanting to do something or not wanting to do something. So, the bottom line is, how can you motivate students to be as motivated as people like Julius Yego? We haven't really cracked that nut yet. We do know that there are ways to motivate students, and many of these ways to motivate students grow out of, we've known them for a really long time, like be really enthusiastic as a teacher, excited and passionate about the topic you're trying to convey, because your emotion, is actually contagious. And I always say that you lose about 10 charisma points, when you go on camera and you're conveying ideas, as opposed to when you're being in person and live. So you have to be like even more vibrant online, which is why it takes me back to that Duolingo person who is like, oh, wow, I'm teaching you Spanish. And, I'm like, but so there's lots of incremental things we can do that we know of that can help lift it a little bit, help lift. Each one can, depending on the student's background, help lift motivation a little bit. So you'll notice that when I'm teaching when we're teaching uncommon sense teaching, in that MOOC, we put so much effort into trying to make the learning fun, vivacious, but also we tried to make the learning easier. And a good way to make things easier is by having nice animations and visualizations that aren't just like, here's a slide of a synapse, and these synapses connect together, and that's how you make memories or whatever. I mean, it's vibrant, it's fun. And what that's doing is an attempt to help, make things a little easier. And when things are a little more easier to understand, to visualize, they're a little bit funny sometimes. Each one of these things is like lowering the difficulty of mastering the new ideas that are available. So the best that we often really know of is gamified kinds of ideas. Gamification seems to be and what do I mean by gamification? It's and you have to be very careful to because a lot of people think that gamification just means, I don't know, having a little bell sound or something when you successfully answer a question or something. But gamification is a lot of different things, really good gamification. And one of the experts in the field is a woman named Daphne Bavelier, who I think is really just a linchpin in the research in these areas. But Daphne says that trying to get good gamified educational materials is like trying to mix chocolate with broccoli and have a tasty outcome. Learning is not an easy, or gamifying your materials, your educational materials, is not necessarily easy, but it does involve it. I mean, part of it really is, having good sounds. The gambling industry has done incredible amounts of research on what are the right sounds to get people, into whatever you're trying to get them to gamble on. And what are the, visual tricks that can attract the eye's attention. And, and there's also a way, remember earlier we talked about how people have this internal sense of who they are and what they're about. And that, I'm making little notes to myself because some of these ideas are, I think, relevant to what I'm going to be working on for this online teaching MOOC. But so one of the greatest game designers in the world says that the first element of a really successful game is that you have to get at the idea that someone is involved in a project that is something bigger than themselves. And I think that idea is often missed in just sort of plug and play kinds of gamification ideas. And that's, I think, a way to get at how do we motivate students. There was one study done, and I wish I could remember where it was, but they decided there was this one area in a very, poor urban environment, but they noticed that there was like these students who would come out of this and they would just excel. And, they were sporadic kind of through the school district. So they decided to do a study and see if they could figure out what was in common with these students who came out of this very difficult environment and excelled. And it all went back. These students, the one thing they had in common was they were in the same first grade classroom with one first grade teacher. They all had this teacher. And this teacher kind of made it a thing that this classroom is super special. And you guys, we are a really, really special group. It's like making it bigger than yourselves. And she was able to kind of incorporate this different view of self that actually remained with these kids, it seems, through their lives. So I think, if in our teaching, we can convey the idea that your group, that the group you're working with is really quite special. And they are, because if you're working with them, you are conveying some really special ideas that it can work motivational magic, even with the ones who you think it won't work with. I remember that, and then I'll shut up here, but when I first became a professor of engineering, it was pretty tough because I was teaching electrical engineering, and a lot of the students I was teaching to were mechanical engineers who really could care less about anything electrical engineering. And more than that, here I was, this brand new teacher, kind of a woman who clearly really doesn't know engineering stuff like us guys do. And, that was back in the day. And so I was like, what do I do? How do I get through to these people? So what I do is I could tell all the guys that were sitting in the back row, and they were all guys, and they'd sit and they'd, be making snarky comments. And I learned all their names, and, I would call on them by name. And my goal was to make them switch from mechanical engineering to electrical engineering because they fell in love with electrical engineering. Now, if you started that class, you would have said, gosh, she has no hope here because these guys hate that topic and they, aren't too keen on the professor and all this stuff on the first day of class. You would be shocked at how many I managed to convert. And it was just through like they'd ask really kind of snarky questions. And I wouldn't reply in a snarky way. I'd take it seriously and spin it into a question that was a really good one, because a lot of times the snarky questions actually have embedded within them really good questions. And you'd just be shocked at how your expectation as a teacher can make such an incredible motivational switch in people's, even in their self-framing, how they frame themselves as more mechanical. We don't touch this electrical stuff, to, oh my gosh, electrical engineering has a lot of commonalities with mechanical. In fact, it's even cooler because you can do all this stuff with it that, and so anyway, that's my long prattle.
Thank you so much.
That was really, boy, you led to a lot of different ideas. So we don't know on motivation, but I think forgive yourself if you're not able to motivate a bunch of students online, because you know what, the bottom line is students in person are difficult to motivate. So I do have to, I'll add just a little bit, as I think I mentioned her before, Veronique Mintz. She wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, and she's just like a high school student, but just how much she hated school, because she'd go in person to person and the students are disruptive and they're doing all this collaborative learning, but the teachers clearly didn't know how to do collaborative learning well. There was just disruption galore, and she loved online learning because these disruptions went away, and she could really, learn well without students hitting each other or being rude to the teacher or something like that, because you can control more easily online. So for some students, learning online is really a godsend. It's our goal, I think, when we're teaching online, to make it as, to promote desire on their part through our own enthusiastic love of the material that we're conveying, but also through the fact that we're trying to make it easier through nice metaphors and, things of that nature. And I think well-structured online learning, there's no answer. There's no one-size-fits-all answer to how to motivate students online, just as there's no one-size-fits-all answer to motivating students in person. But we can improve, and those little bits of a well-designed online course can really make a big difference. And by well-designed, I do not necessarily mean designed per standard instructional methodologies, because some of those approaches actually can kill students' desire to learn. For example, should I say this? I don't know. Fabio, should I say it?
Go
Should we
ahead.
pause the recording?
Yeah, let's pause the recording.
Let's pause the recording.
Okay.
Luis has a question, I think, or a comment.
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks. Thank you for it. I'm so honored to be here. I'm sorry about my broken English. English is not my first language, but I have a small question. It is regarding something that happens when you do sports and also when you are working on. What do neuroscience says about the last mile? Why always the last mile is the hardest?
I didn't quite catch it. What does neuroscience have?
You said about the last mile, about why it's so hard to finish the last 10% of your work.
Oh,
So sometimes you do the harder thing. You have done the harder thing, but the last 10% is always the hardest. Why?
I think it must vary a lot by people, because I actually have not heard that expression that the last 10% is the hardest. And for me personally, usually the last 10% is the easiest, because it's like, you're writing a book and it's like, oh my word, there's all these ideas. How do I put them together in a cohesive whole? And then, you kind of get it and it's coming together. And then that last 10% where you're kind of seeing where it's going, it's like, yay, it's easy sledding now, and it's fun. And it's really, whereas those first, that beginning and even the middle where you're really realizing you're in a quandary and you've got a time deadline and all this stuff. So I actually had not heard that the final 10% was harder, and for me personally, I usually find the last 10% is like, I can see the horizon. I know where I'm going, and it's a happy time.
Okay. So thank you.
I've heard similarly that something like the last 10% takes 90% of the time. But usually you already got started. So like, I just want this to finish. My God, I just want to get this done.
Oh, that's a good point, because oftentimes people really underestimate how much time something is going to take.
Like
And
editing
so-
a book.
Yeah. So if that's the case, then that last 10% is indeed going to be like, it actually can take 90% of the time.
It's
Just
also a fear somehow of, really wanting to make sure everything's like correct and the way you want it to be. And that's what takes the longest time, because once you hand it in or submit it or whatever, it's gone, it's out of your hands. And maybe you draw that last little bit out to make sure you just get everything right. I don't know.
it could be. I've really tried to, there has been enough written about this fear of letting go that I actually try to put it in conscious mind of, like, let's say I draft an important email to someone. I will go over it, I'll review it. I'm a little compulsive because it's really important. And then I'm like, oh, I don't want to send it out. And I'll go, that's that time. Sorry, Barb, override, click. And then I'm like, okay, and then I go, oh, I should have said this, So, but I think being consciously aware of that propensity to hold something and not let it go is a good way to actually overcome that, because that really is I think that's a pretty common tendency. Certainly I've got that.
This noticing thing that you mentioned reminds me of a technique used called whoops. I don't know if you know
Oh
this
yes,
technique.
yeah. Gabrielle Oettingen.
Yeah, so first you think
She's
about the things you wish to do, like I wish to do something. So I wish to finish this report. And then you think about the obstacles. So what are the obstacles here? And then the third step, okay, second step, you think about all the obstacles. And then third step is creating a plan. So that's what Barb said. So when this happens, then I'm gonna do something. Because if you have planned beforehand, when you face the objection, the difficulty you're facing, this resistance, you have a plan. And in most cases, when we didn't plan this before, and we face the problem, we don't have enough mental energy to come up with a solution. But in this case, we have planned it before, we just need to execute. So I know this technique was thought to be used in other fields, but I think it applies to our challenges in learning and finishing things as well.
Yes, yeah, I think you're exactly right.
Barb, I just want to let you know the time. We are
Yeah,
getting, I don't want to take you, I don't know if you have other appointments, and that's it.
oh, this has been so wonderful that I can't help but in my mind go, gosh, what a wonderful group. I wonder if we could get together and do some other courses on online learning, together. And I do feel like I'm, just like I'm just kind of finally getting a sense of how we can do this. Before it was like, oh, okay, here is the material I will present, and now I'm like, no, let's have fun together.
Barb,
That's good.
before we conclude and you go, we have here a tradition, and I'd like to suggest to the group to do something similar, not at Class Central. We have a tradition at the classes I take that if everyone here feel like sharing one word that can express your experience during this Uncommon Sense teaching cohort. So how could you describe and summarize in 1 or 2 words only, because we have a lot of people here, how was your experience, and share it. Now it can be by the chat or opening the microphone. I think this could be helpful and also a good opportunity to bond again. It's so nice to hear from other people. So what do you think about this idea? Do you think you can do it?
Yes, looking forward to it.
Okay, so you first, Sadia.
Yes, I feel honored. I had this privilege to be in a Class Central with Professor Oakley, and I know that she's going to San Francisco in February. So I wonder if the papers from this conference will be published anywhere, or I know you are not the organizer, but if you have any insight in that, because the subjects that they're going to discuss are very interesting.
I have looked like because I've spoken for them before, and they don't even seem to put the videos or anything. I'm not sure they record anything. So it's a really interesting conference, and I'm excited to be there. But I don't think they have papers, and I think it's more just talks. So I'll be like going to everyone that I can, because I think you have to physically be in the room to see the talk.
They do have online registration.
Yeah, they have a hybrid, yeah. But
Yeah.
it's 500 registration.
Oh, that's right. It's a hybrid. Yeah, and the hard thing is, I have to give them a lot of credit, because it is really hard and expensive to put on a hybrid conference. So, I don't feel like, I'd feel kind of bad going to them and saying, okay, now give some of your product away that you work so hard to create, because organizing a conference is really a thankful thing. I mean, a thankless thing. And, I think most of us speakers are speaking either for free or for very low cost. So, but it's still, it's like at the Fairmont Hotel. And they have to have like security for all these, for the COVID sorts of things. So, I just let them do their thing and I'll just go and share. But certainly for a lot of my speeches, they're also publicly available elsewhere. So it's not like I'm, hiding anything or, if you look around, you can find I don't know, there might be something new that I think there is some new stuff, but it will eventually emerge in the public, and sooner rather than later. So, but yeah, they got some great speakers lined up. So if you can afford it, I highly recommend the conference.
Now, Barb, we have the words people are posting on the chat. So just receive the love, okay? So the words are generous, heartwarming, enthusiastic, enlightening, eye-opening, enlightening, inspiring. Thank you, Barb. You are the best. Honored, personal, inspiring, insightful, heartwarming, invaluable, enlightening, sense of belonging and bonding, engaging, friendly, friendship, happiness. It's a great feeling together with like-minded, kind-hearted people. Really useful and inspiring, fun, gratifying, and unique.
Wow. Well, that's how I feel about, I feel like it's like taken 4 weeks for us to gel. And, I think you guys gelled before, I sort of figured out how we should structure this and run this. And it's really just to let you, rather than. So I just thank you so much. And I really have to say that Class Central they are the ne plus ultra in the online world. It's a wonderful platform that really looks at everyone, not with their own, it's not like they just give a dispassionate perspective and really allow all the different platforms to shine through, this cohort and various other wonderful things that DeWall and the team are creating. So it's a real pleasure to share here. And I'm going to miss you all. But let us hope that we'll come up with some new ways to get back together and be able to, speak together.
It's a great honor to be as one of the Class Central staff. So I'm really happy to be with all of you here. It was a great experience. We're gonna keep the forum open so we can keep sharing the links and love for learning and teaching. And you guys have a Barb's email, and please consider writing a review about Uncommon Sense Teaching. Since it's kind of recent, new MOOC, we don't have many reviews there. So I really need to ask you guys to do this. It's going to be really helpful for everyone. And that's it. Any final considerations, Barb? Thank you so much for making the time. I know.
So I think let us all give a gigantic round of applause for Fabio and Nielda for doing such a fantastic job in running all of this and making everything easy for all of us. And so thank you again.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you,
everyone.
Fabio. Thank you, Nielda.